I get Chipotle quite often, and usually I go and order it at the restaurant. It's always pretty quick, and there's a Chipotle less than 10 minutes from my apartment. But a couple of months ago, I saw on the Chipotle app that I could get a free delivery. I can't remember why, but it was a limited time deal, so I decided to use it. It was a little bit later at night, maybe 9 p.m., and I had recently got home from work. Chipotle sounded great, so I ordered it and used the free delivery. After that, I went to take a shower and change. So when I was just about done in the shower, I heard a knock on the door and figured that the Chipotle was delivered. I finished showering and put my clothes on. Then I went to the door. After opening it and looking out into the hallway, I was expecting to see the food, but there was nothing there. So I went back and checked on my phone. I had no idea why else there would be a knocking on my door. Sure enough, it said that my order had in fact been delivered. This was very confusing to me. I went out and looked into the hallway again. There was definitely nothing there, and I had heard the knock on the door. So what else could it have been? I realized it was very possible somebody stole the food. If someone walking by in my hallway saw Chipotle sitting there and wanted it, they could have just took it. I called the Chipotle saying that I didn't get my order and thought that it was stolen. It was a little bit awkward, but they eventually ended up delivering another one to me. This time I was right there at the door when it arrived. Still, I was very angry that somebody had stolen it the first time. I didn't think the people who lived in my building would do that. I mean, I knew a good number of my neighbors. I didn't know any of them really that great, but they all seemed nice. Well, after Chipotle, I went to bed. The next morning, when I left my apartment, I saw there was a note taped to the outside of my door. I took it off and read it. The note said, "Thanks for the Chipotle last night," and then there was a sort of creepy smile face on the note as well. I was disgusted when I read it. Whoever had stolen my food was now teasing me about it. I didn't know it could be done though. My apartment does not have security cameras in the hallways, and I didn't think there was any way of me being able to figure it out. I wasn't going to knock on every door and confront people about it, accusing them. So I ripped up the note and threw it away, and hoped that I would never have anything like that happen again. Well, after work that day, I cooked something at home. The next morning, I once again had another note on my door. This one said, "No food for me last night?" Once more, I was very angry. Whoever was doing this really had some nerve to keep putting notes on my door. I just threw this one in the trash as well. I went out into the hallway and looked around, but nobody was out. So fast forward to the very next night. I was at home by myself, and it was probably like 10 p.m. Out of nowhere, I heard a knocking at my door. I just had a feeling that it was the same person who had been messing with me. I mean, there was really no reason for somebody to be knocking on my door. When I heard the knocking, I happened to be in my kitchen, which is very close to the doorway. I walked right over to it and opened it up. When I did, nobody was there, but I heard footsteps quickly moving away. I looked and saw a man going around the corner where the hallway turned. I only saw him for a second, and I did not recognize him. I left my apartment and decided to go after him. I went to the corner and saw him go into the stairwell. When he did, I went in after him. However, I kept my distance and was quiet. I do not think that he knew I was following him because I was a decent ways back. After making it to the stairs, he went up one floor and then into the hallway. When I opened up the door from the stairwell, I just barely saw him entering an apartment unit. I walked right over to it and then knocked on the door. At first, nobody answered. I figured that this guy would not answer the door, but I at least knew where he lived. I decided to knock again though, and surprisingly, this time the door opened up. But it was not the same guy. A woman was standing there. I did not know her, but I did recognize her and had seen her in the building before. She asked me what I wanted so late at night and seemed kind of annoyed. I asked her who the man was who had just entered the apartment, and she said it was her boyfriend. She said that he was staying with her for a couple of days. I told her that he stole my Chipotle several nights ago and was now messing with me. As I was saying this, I actually saw the guy walk by in the apartment behind her. He seemed to overhear and then walked over to us. The woman was starting to say that she had no idea what I was talking about and she was really confused, but the man interrupted the conversation and said that I was crazy and it never happened. I said that I had just seen him knock on my door and run away minutes earlier. The woman then seemed to question her boyfriend. I remember she said that he had just been gone for a minute and then asked him where he went. I don't remember what excuse he started to make up, but the woman didn't seem to believe him. She then said she remembered him having Chipotle the other night as well. The guy was still claiming that I was making it up and stuff, but the two of them were seeming to get into an argument. I was just standing there in the doorway now watching them. The woman soon asked if I could go and shut the door, but they continued to argue. I felt that I had probably solved the case, and I figured that the guy would not do something like that again, so I left and headed back to my apartment. I was really shocked at what I had just seen. So I got back to my place and I was going to start getting ready for bed. However, probably about 15 minutes or so later, there was a loud knocking at my door, and the knocking soon turned into a very loud banging. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. The man was back, and he was angrily banging on my front door. I yelled from the other side that I was calling the cops. The man did not stop and kept literally punching at my door. I dialed 911 and reported the situation. It sounded like the man soon began to kick at my door then. This went on for a good 2 or 3 more minutes before stopping. The man finally then stormed off. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived. I told them what I knew, and they said they would go to the apartment that the guy was staying at. Well, I found out later that he had left. I guess he had in fact been staying for a few days with the woman he was dating, but after their argument, she kicked him out, and then he started banging at my door, I guess out of anger. After that, he left the place. I later heard that he had anger issues and a troubled past. The woman and him broke up though, so I haven't had to deal with him since. I used to work at a Chipotle several years ago. I worked there for a few months. However, this is something that happened after my time of working there. Even though I didn't work at Chipotle for that long, I still loved the food. I went to get it all the time, not at the location that I worked at usually though. Anyways, one night I had been out pretty late and I got really hungry. On my way home, I went to a Chipotle to get some food. It was probably like 9 something at night. When I pulled into the parking lot, I didn't bother to look and realize that they were closed. So I got out of my car and I walked all the way to the door before realizing that they were not open. I was confused at first because I thought they were open until 10 p.m. For whatever reason, they were closed though. I did notice that sitting on the sidewalk sort of near the door was a woman wearing a Chipotle shirt and hat. When she saw me, she said hi. I said hi and I asked her if they closed at 9. She said they had closed early that night because of a short staff. Then she told me how she was stranded there and didn't have a ride. She asked me if I could give her a ride to the gas station. Now I don't know why, but I said yes. Maybe it was because I used to work at Chipotle, so I somehow felt like we were teammates or something. Or maybe it's just because she seemed like a nice person from the first interaction. But I agreed, and the woman followed me to my car. We both got inside, and when we did, I asked her where she was going. She mentioned a gas station's name that I hadn't heard of before, and she said that her friend would meet her there. I didn't know where the place was. When I said this, the woman mentioned that it was close by and then gave me an address. I still didn't know where it was, so she directed me as I drove. The gas station was actually really close by. It took less than 5 minutes to get there. However, it was kind of away from all the other businesses and in an area that was much quieter. And when I pulled into the parking lot, I realized that this gas station was completely closed. And not just closed, but abandoned. Every light was off. There were some spots in the parking lot with weeds growing out of them, and the place looked like it hadn't seen customers in months, if not years. There were also no other cars around. When I pulled into the parking lot, I asked if this was the right place, and she said yes. I told her that it appeared closed, and the woman told me that she was going to go and check anyways. I told her that I could clearly see no lights were on and the place seemed to be abandoned. Still, the woman told me that she wanted to just go and see if the place was open or not, and encouraged me to do so as well. When she said that for a second time, it really blew my mind, because it was pretty obvious that the place was abandoned. I said that I was just going to leave there now. At first, the woman asked if she could just try and see if they were open and if I could wait for her. I said that I would drop her off at another gas station though, and I started to drive away at that point. She then reluctantly agreed. I went to the next nearest gas station that was probably less than a mile away. This one was actually open. I then dropped the woman off there. After leaving, I couldn't help but feel weird about the whole thing. Could she have been trying to set me up for something by making me go to the abandoned gas station? What would have happened if I had let her get out of my car and I waited for her, or if I had gotten out as well? I'm glad that I didn't. A couple of years ago, I went to Chipotle with a friend of mine, Jordan. We were hanging out and we went to a store nearby. When we were really hungry, we went to the Chipotle that was basically in the same parking lot. There were lots of businesses in the area. So anyways, we went inside, ordered, and got our food. We then went to a table sort of at the front of the restaurant and sat down. There were a decent amount of other people sitting around the restaurant and eating. I would say that it was decently busy. So at some point, I remember feeling my phone vibrate in my pocket from getting a text. Jordan and I were talking, and I mentioned that somebody was texting me. I took out my phone and looked, and it was a number that I did not recognize. The text said, "I'm in Chipotle with you, and I'm watching you right now." When I saw the text, I showed it to Jordan. We both laughed at first, and thought that it had to be a friend who we knew that was trying to prank me. But then I remember looking around the restaurant just out of curiosity. When I did, I noticed that sitting in the corner of the restaurant, there was a man looking at me. In fact, he waved when I saw him. It wasn't quite a friendly wave though, but more of just kind of weird. I looked at this guy and had no idea who he was. I didn't know how he would get my number either. Jordan did not know who he was as well. I texted the guy back, asking who he was. He texted back saying, "Never mind who I am, I know who I am. Do you know who you are?" Obviously, this was very strange, and it also confused me. I didn't even know what he meant when he said that. I looked back at the man, and he was still just staring at me. I then blocked his number, and went back to talking to Jordan. I hoped that the guy would realize that I was not amused by his little prank, and that he would leave. Still, I couldn't help but feel pretty creeped out by the whole thing. This guy had somehow got my phone number and knew who I was. I didn't get another text from him though because I had blocked his number. I tried not to look back at him, but eventually I did. When I did, I saw him get up from his seat. He then started walking close to Jordan and I. I got a little nervous, not knowing what this guy could do, but he then stopped at a table that was literally next to ours and then sat down. He looked at us both as he did so. I remember that I asked him what he was doing. The guy didn't say anything. He stood there, just staring for a few moments. I asked him again, and he then put his hand up as if to say, "Just a minute." I actually thought that he was going to speak, and it looked like he was going to, but then he just turned and walked away. He walked all the way to the door and then left the Chipotle. I kept watching him until he was out of sight. Jordan and I both talked about the guy for the rest of the time that we were at Chipotle. We had no idea what had just happened. Then we left, and neither of us has seen the guy since. I still have no idea how he got my number, or what exactly he was doing there. I used to work at a Chipotle. It was one of my first jobs that I had when I was younger. So I got the job there when I was 17 and in high school. It was very nice because the Chipotle I worked at was less than a mile from my house. I lived with my parents and brother in this neighborhood that was basically behind the Chipotle. The restaurant was off a busier road and there was a Starbucks and some other stuff connected to it. But it made it really easy for me to be able to walk to and from work every day because I didn't have a car at the time, and a lot of shifts that I would work would happen when my parents were still working. So one time I walked to work for a pretty typical shift at Chipotle. I worked from sometime in the afternoon until 9 p.m. and we closed at 10. I was working behind the counter and getting the customers what they wanted. There was a decent amount of customers most of the day from what I remember. I just know that at one point I was getting a bowl for this guy and he was telling me what he wanted. When we got to the end, out of nowhere, he asked me what time I got off of work. I didn't really know what to say and I just told him 9. I wasn't sure why he was asking because we hadn't been having a conversation other than what he wanted in his bowl. Then he had just asked me that. However, after I told him, he just said okay and didn't really say anything else. He then went and sat down someplace in the restaurant. I went back to work to help the next customers. I continued with work for probably an hour at least, It was then that I was randomly looking around, and I realized that the same guy was still there. He was sitting sort of in the corner. He was not eating anymore, but just sitting at a table by himself. I found it to be a little bit odd that he had been there for so long. However, I just continued with work and didn't really think too much of it. But hours later, I remember noticing that the guy was still there. He had been there for such a long time that this was now pretty suspicious. After remembering him asking about what time I got off, I couldn't help but wonder if he was waiting for me. I didn't really notice him looking at me or anything, but I didn't know what he was doing. He was just sitting there, mostly looking at his phone on the table. By now, it was about 8 o'clock, and I got off in about 1 hour. I hoped that in that time period he would leave, and I did my best to forget about it. Over the next hour, we didn't get that many customers. Finally, 9 o'clock came, and I was off, and I went to leave the place. When I did, I noticed that the man was still there. I hurried out the door and then went past the Starbucks to the street that went to my neighborhood. It wasn't until I had started walking on that street that I heard footsteps behind me. I looked back over my shoulder and noticed the same guy. I had a terrible feeling about it when I saw him. He was probably 50 feet back, but walking the same way that I was. I knew there was no way that this was a coincidence. I walked the way back home for a few minutes, but I was feeling really nervous. I was hoping that the man would not get closer to me. I checked, and he seemed to be about the same distance away. However, I did not feel comfortable leading this guy to my house where I lived. I had the idea then to call my parents. I got out my cell phone and I called my dad. Luckily, he picked up, and I told him what was going on. My dad said that he would come and pick me up. I continued with the walk home and checked over my shoulder again. When I did, I noticed that the guy was a little closer than before. I hoped that my dad would get there soon. Several minutes later, I saw his car headed down the street towards me. When it got close enough, I ran out into the street and I got in the back door. It felt great to be in the car and out of the street with the guy. I then looked, and the guy who had been following me suddenly ran into somebody's backyard. My dad took out his phone and called the police. He reported what happened, but he had lost track of the guy. The police looked around the area, but I think the man got away. I'm just grateful that my dad answered his phone when he did and could come and pick me up. I got a ride to and from work for a while after that. I never saw the guy again though, and nothing like that happened the rest of the time that I worked at Chipotle. This happened just a few weeks ago. I order Chipotle all the time. Usually I get the same thing, and I order it a lot after work. So on this day in particular, it was like any other. I had just finished work and was on my way home. I ordered Chipotle on the app and was going to pick it up. I had done this so many times. By the time I would get the Chipotle, I would just run inside, get my bag from the shelf, and then be on my way. So I drove to the Chipotle, parked, and saw that my order was in fact ready. I got out of my car and walked inside. The restaurant was not too busy, but there were a few people around here and there. But one in particular I noticed right away. There was a larger man who wore glasses and had a mostly shaved head standing right in front of the shelf. It was the shelf where orders go for pickup, and I saw a single bag there which had to be mine. But this guy was like right in the way, blocking it. I was guessing that the guy had ordered online and was waiting for it to be done or something. So I walked up to the shelf, and I remembered that I said something like, "Sorry man, I gotta get my order here." He looked at me but did not move. I was now just standing right in front of him. He just stared at me with an annoyed look but did not say anything. I was surprised and had expected him to move out of the way. So after a few awkward seconds, the man actually got more in my way and then asked what I was doing. I pointed to the bag on the shelf and said that was my order and I was picking it up. I asked the man if he minded moving. The man said, "Yes, actually, I do mind." I didn't know why this guy was randomly being so difficult. I also didn't really know what to say. I asked him if he could hand it to me then, and he said no. I then tried to somehow move behind him and grab it without touching him. The guy moved though intentionally and bumped into me. I moved back and realized that for some reason, he was clearly not going to let me get my order. So after taking a few steps back, I just stood there. I figured the guy was waiting for his order, and once he received it, he would leave, and then I could get mine. As much as I wanted to fight the guy or whatever, I didn't want to get banned from a Chipotle for fighting some weirdo, so I waited. But the guy did not receive an order. At least 5 minutes went by, and the man didn't move at all. And the Chipotle really wasn't that busy. In fact, a few minutes went by where nobody was ordering or anything, so I started to wonder if this guy had even ordered anything at all. He was just standing there, kind of looking straight ahead. He never got an order. After several more minutes, I did not want to wait anymore. The man kind of seemed to let his guard down a little bit and had moved a few steps in front. I realized that if I was quick, I could go grab my order behind him and go. So I slowly and quietly positioned myself. Then I quickly walked right over and I grabbed the bag. As soon as I had it completely in my hands, the man suddenly moved back. It was no doubt intentional, and his back ran right into me and nearly knocked me over. But I didn't let it faze me. I kept going and I walked to the exit. However, the man turned and started to walk out after me. He followed me all the way outside and then to my car. When I got to my car, I opened up the door and got in the driver's seat. But the man stood there and blocked me from being able to close the door. I asked him what he was doing. He only cursed at me in response. He wouldn't move, so I couldn't shut the door. After cursing at me for almost a full minute, he finally kicked the side of my car and then walked away. I was finally able to leave. That guy made me really angry, and I have no idea why he was blocking me, and I really can't believe he decided to follow me to my car. I didn't go to that Chipotle for a while after that.